If you plan on growing a garden this year, one of the things you're likely considering is whether or not you should plant in raised beds or straight into the ground. And I have some thoughts on both. And so I thought I would go over some of the benefits of planting in raised beds and some of the benefits of planting in the ground, and so that you can better decide what's better for you. Because the thing is, there's good pros and cons for both, and it truly just depends on your situation. And so let's get into some of the benefits and some of the cons. So let's start out with the benefits of raised bed gardening. The very first thing that pretty much wins across the board is that it makes planting and harvesting easier. If you have a raised bed, you're not bending over as far to harvest and to plant, and so it just makes it a lot easier on your body. Another great thing is that it keeps your plants confined to a specific area. Sometimes things can get a little bit wild when you plant just wherever, straight into the ground. And so having things in raised beds or confined areas makes it pretty nice for just keeping things in order. Another really great thing is that when you fill your raised bed with soil, which I will talk about the kind of soils to use later on in this video, because that's a really important part to raised bed gardening. You want to have good quality soil, but when you fill your raised beds with that good quality mixture, it tends to not get as compacted as the soil just straight in the ground does. When you plant directly in the ground, usually your just existing soil in your backyard or wherever it is that you're planting, it can get pretty hard and it can make planting difficult. But if you start off with raised beds filled with good quality soil or a good mixture of soil, it usually tends to stay pretty soft, and it makes planting all throughout the year much easier than it does directly planting in the ground. The fact that it's softer, the fact that it's easier to harvest and to plant, and that your plants are confined is some really great benefits of raised bed gardening. But if you're thinking of just planting straight in the ground, there's benefits to that also. And some of those benefits are the fact that you don't have to buy a raised bed. Your ground obviously already exists, and so besides just, tending to that soil and getting it ready for planting and most likely adding in some compost and amendments to make sure your plants grow healthy, there's not as much that you have to do. But sometimes if your soil is too hard, or if it has too much clay, or if it's too sandy, there's so much amending that has to be done to existing ground soil or just the dirt in your backyard that it makes planting not as fun, because there's so much work that has to be done prior. Sometimes it's easier just getting raised beds set up and buying that good quality mixture of soil that goes inside of them. And then year after year, you can just keep that amended with some compost or some other soil amendments. And so if you have a really nice area that you can plant directly into the ground, though, that could be a really great option. And one of the things that I like about planting certain things directly into the ground is that you don't waste all of your garden bed space. I have raised beds and I have things that are planted directly in the ground. And so the one area of my garden where I like to plant things directly in the ground is a large area where I plant my tomatoes, and they're just really long rows, because tomato plants can get so big, it could kind of just be a waste of space if I put them in my raised beds. I can only put a few tomato plants in my raised beds, whereas when I plant in these long rows that I have, I can plant up to like 100 or so tomatoes. I don't always plant that many, but there's been years in the past where I have. And so it's really nice having all that extra space to plant things that take up a lot of room. And then some of the cons of raised bed gardening is kind of what I've already previously mentioned, but you have to buy the materials to make that raised bed, or buy the raised bed itself. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty low investment, and it's usually just a one-time investment. So that's another benefit. Cons of in the ground planting are, like I mentioned, there sometimes is a lot of prep work getting that soil ready. But then once it's ready and you have that area ready to plant, then, there's not much else that you have to do. But one of the things I will say from personal experience is that my in-ground planting requires a lot more prep work. My raised beds are just a lot simpler. And so when I go out to plant things in the ground, not in my raised beds, but just directly into the ground, I can't just do it on any day. I have to get that soil moist first, or plan to plant right after it rains, because that soil gets so hard, it makes digging the holes for my plants extremely hard. It also isn't really ideal for planting seeds in unless I rototill the soil and really get it prepped. It is great for transplanting in, but like I mentioned, it gets hard, and so I really have to make sure I get that soil prepped. But if I just decide to go plant things out in my raised beds on any day, even, tomorrow or next week, whenever it is, that soil is already loose and fluffy, and it pretty much stays that way all year long. And so there's not that much prep work, and so I can pretty much just plant whenever I choose to. And so I love the fact that my raised beds are pretty much just always ready for planting, whereas the ground requires more work. But once the things are in the ground and I start watering frequently and everything, that soil stays moist, and then it's a lot easier to work with. But right off the bat at the beginning of the season, it's a little bit tougher. So if you choose to go with raised beds, one of the things that you need to do is make sure you fill it with a good quality mixture. You want to have compost and raised bed soil. They actually make just a raised bed soil mixture. You should be able to find it at your local garden center, but I'll link to a couple options below. But it is specifically designed for raised beds. Whereas potting soil is made for potted plants, and that should actually be changed out pretty frequently. And so you don't want to have to change out the entire mixture of your soil in your raised beds year after year. You want to add things to it like compost and other amendments to add nutrients back into your soil, but you don't want to have to replace all of the soil. Whereas just a straight potting soil, it's made for smaller pots, and it should be replaced pretty frequently. So make sure you go with a raised bed soil. And if you're trying to decide which type of raised bed to go with, I would suggest either building your own or buying a garden bed like the Ollie garden bed. I recently got an Ollie garden bed for myself, and I wanted to get it because it's something that I currently didn't need. I have raised beds that we built years ago, but I want to be able to give honest reviews of raised beds that are a great option for lots of other gardeners. And so I got the Ollie garden bed. And if you head to this video right here, my husband and I are putting it together, and it's super simple to put together. It's made of good quality material that's built to last for 20 plus years. The sides are not supposed to rot out. They're coated with a special material the material is coated so that the sides do not rot out. And they're super lightweight and easy to move around. So I think it's a really great garden bed for anyone if you're just looking to get started, or if you need to add more raised beds to your garden. These are a really great option. And if you use the code AUDREY10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off, which is a plus. So head to this video next, check out us putting together the Ollie garden beds. And if you're interested, the link will also be in the description, and I will see you there.